Ago when I first met, about a month before I first met Reverend Hunter, I was invited to Russell Simmons' office to meet with him, and I thought, all right, that's pretty cool, I get to meet with Russell Simmons. And when I got there, Dr. Ben Chavis was there. And that was really cool to meet Dr. Ben Chavis. You know, his entire life has been a battle. He worked with Dr. Martin Luther King. You know, of course, he fought, you know, against segregation. He spent time in jail. I mean, he's done it all. He's really paved the way. And so Dr. Chavis had this idea of merging the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King with Occupy Wall Street and forming Occupy the Dream. You know, Dr. Chavis has just overwhelmed me with the stories he's told from working with Dr. King, and that he sees Occupy Wall Street as the continuation of the fight for economic justice that Dr. King started. You know, when Dr. King was organizing the Poor People's Campaign, there were not as many people living in poverty as there are today in America.
We'll do that later, baby.
The inequality of wealth in America today is worse than it was in Dr. Martin Luther King's time, as insane as that sounds. So, you know, this was a very inspiring, you know, coalition that we formed. We got to go to D.C. where I met with Reverend Hunter and Reverend Jamal Bryant. And there's been actions all through this country at Federal Reserves today to mark the beginning of this movement, this campaign. And from what I hear in all the other cities, it's been spectacular. The turnout's been great. The energy's been great. Just real quick, a lot of people say, why the Federal Reserve? You know, what's the connection? And when people say that, I just don't even know what they're talking about. You know, they have two heads when they say that. You know, the Federal Reserve is the central planning force behind our economy. I mean, you know, Ben Bernanke, the Federal Reserve Chairman, when we were first organizing for Occupy Wall Street, in the run-up to that, we were protesting the Fed. And, you know, we were comparing it to Egypt. Egypt had Mubarak, and they were all calling for Mubarak to step down. So we were going to the New York Fed, and we were calling for Bernanke to step down, because he was our Mubarak. You know, I mean, the Federal Reserve moved around $29 trillion of our money in secrecy. And what did they do with that money? You know, they gave it to the big banks who destroyed the economy. You know, that there's been many, many different Federal Reserve programs, but, you know, some quick highlights, you know. They gave near zero interest loans to the big banks who destroyed the economy, and those big banks then gave that money back to the American government at 3 to 5% interest. So, like, does everyone understand how ridiculous that is?
They're totally
Near zero interest loans, and then they give it back to the American government for 3 to 5% interest. I mean, this is the ultimate. It's a criminal racket. It's the Wall Street mafia, and this you know, Bernanke is the godfather of the Wall Street racket.
Exactly.
Okay, so I don't want to go off on a big tangent.
Because I didn't really give you your due introduction, can you talk about the beginning of the 99% movement, and also how you got, when you were coming to DC, about the process of talking to all the different Occupy Wall Street folks?
Okay, so the 99% movement, in February of 2010, I was reporting on the economic crisis, and I was just so sick of reporting on it over and over again about these crimes. So I wrote this 6-part investigative series called The Economic Elite versus the People of the United States. And the entire thing was going through, you know, record unemployment, the explosion in poverty, the all-time record-breaking gap between the top 1% and the remaining 99%, the inequalities throughout America, and how unemployment was undercounted, not counting, you know, part-time people who are looking for full-time work, long-term and unemployed. So I went through this whole thing, and I basically said that, you know, 99% of the population across the political spectrum, whatever your views are, we need to find common ground and come together. So that it was a big call to start a 99% movement. So this went on for about a year online, and we kept looking for common threads where we could all agree. And the biggest part that we can agree on, which Dylan Radigan over there is going to talk about in a little bit, is getting money out of politics. We had what we called a system of political bribery, campaign finance, lobbying, and the revolving door between Washington and Wall Street. So people came together to support getting money out of politics, and they also came together to support breaking up the banks. So people across the political spectrum agreed on those things consistently. Then this group called Ad Busters came along, and they put out their call and they said, "What are your demands?" Turned out that that was a brilliant call because everyone came forward with demands. But our key demands of getting money out of politics and breaking up the banks has been pushed to the back. So the 99% movement has obviously evolved far beyond what we've done, and it's become this, cacophony of different issues. And I think it's important it stays that way. But my focus personally is on getting money out of politics right now. And speaking next is Dylan Radigan from MSNBC. He has a new book out called Greedy.
And the author of a brand new book called Greedy Bastard.
Dylan has been a huge supporter. He was coming down to Liberty Park from the beginning, helping to rally the troops and get more people out. Take interest, Mama. Been on his show a few times. Been, just amazing. This guy kept me sane during the economic crisis and the bailout because he was the only guy on TV who was actually speaking the truth.
Thank you for having me out. I want to start today, because of the nature of what today is, by giving you an example of how the kitchen table issues of our time, whether it is unemployment, whether it is poverty, whether it is the dysfunction in our educational system, whether it's the poor nutrition that has infected so much of our society, whatever the kitchen table issue may be, unfortunately, every time you try to go down the rabbit hole to figure out why it is that we have all these problems, inevitably they lead you back to the corrupting and briberous relationship between the special interests that are financing our government and the interests of the communities of this country. And I had the privilege today of publishing a piece in partnership with Russell Simmons and Ben Chavis on what we call the mathematics of racism. And what you'll see when you look at the data is that we have more black and Hispanic men today in prison than we had slaves in 1850. No joke. We have, in this country today, 40% of our inmates are black men, and yet only 14% of our population is black men. When you look, I won't rattle, in fear of horrifying you, I'm going to stop rattling off data. The second thing that I will bring to your attention, though, is this. When you look in the prospectus of the publicly traded private prison operation companies, the #1 risk factor that they speak to as a risk to the profits of a private industrial or private prison industrial complex is the risk of more lenient minor drug laws. Right. They say this to their